I've just read The Veiled Thread.
Yeah, that's good.
And you have in it the principal characters, a grandfather and a grandson. What is going on between these men? I've got my own ideas, but I want to hear from you, from the author.
What's going on between the two men?
Yeah.
Well, in the narrative in the book, the grandson meets his grandfather for the first time when the grandfather's a really old man, and towards the end of his life, really. And the thing that the grandson learns very, very quickly is that there are a lot of regrets, in his grandfather about the way he's conducted his life and the mistakes that he's made. And this strikes a chord with the grandson simply because the grandson's making a lot of mistakes as well, and he doesn't know why. He's got no understanding of why things are going wrong. He has trouble with relationships and all of this sort of stuff. And the conversations with his grandfather start to unravel, if you like, some of the deep-seated things that are going wrong. And really what is going wrong is that it's inherited. It's inherited from his grandfather's efforts in the First World War in Palestine. And they've been passed down through the generations, and the grandson has I guess it's a bit like the conversion on the road to Damascus. It's an epiphany. He starts to realise that his grandfather, despite the fact that he's never known his grandfather during his life, has quite an influence on his life and his attitudes and all of that sort of stuff.
He gets to know him near the end of his life, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's the book and the story show that relationship start to blossom as they sit and talk, and his grandfather doesn't say a lot. It's typical of that older generation. They don't really belabor the trials and tribulations and the tragedies of their lives, but the grandson is a perceptive person, dysfunctional but perceptive nonetheless, and he just starts to, as I said, unravel and the things that have happened, and it sets the grandson onto a journey of discovery about himself through the life of his grandfather and investigating that life.
Yes. How do you think, I mean, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, how do you think your background influenced your writing of this book?
Well, yeah, my background is I've had very little to do with my grandfather, and I guess there's one of the links between me and the story that I'm telling. And I have had through my life a series of attitudes, responses to various things that I don't fully understand, and I haven't fully understood until it became clear to me that somehow my life was linked, and my attitudes and my character were linked to not just hardwired in DNA, but linked in some other mechanism to the tragedies of my grandfather's life. My grandfather had a tragic life, and so did my mum in many ways, because during the Depression they lost everything. They lived off rabbits. They all the things that people through the Depression had to bear, and my mum never talked about that. And she never talked really through her life about the trials and tribulations of my grandfather either. I don't think she knew a lot about what he went through, only the bits that came tied directly to her. A broken marriage, that is, my grandfather's marriage was broken. My grandmother dying of cancer, my grandfather losing his farm, my walking away from the farm, walking away from his family, fighting a war in Palestine before all of that happened, leading up to all that dysfunction and failure. It started me thinking about why was this happening, to me. And the more I talked to my mother, and my mum came and lived with me, and the more I lived with my mother, the more it became clear to me that there were so many things that she never talked about that couldn't have been learnt from my mother by me, because, or my grandfather, because they never talked about it. So how was this coming through to me in my own little bits of dysfunction? So I thought to myself, I'll write this down. And when I started writing it down, lo and behold, there was a story there, and there was a bigger story, and it was a story that has its roots, it has its underpinning in that first war, that great war of 1914-18, where so many young men went away, went through hell and came back different people. And then they had children, they had families, and they passed on that trauma of all of those lives lost in the war to their offspring and their offspring's offspring and their offspring's offspring's offspring. So, up to, this inherited trauma lasts for 4 or 5 generations. Yeah.
Well, there's a medical term for it, isn't there?
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics, yeah. I've heard of that. Yeah. But this book is a fiction, isn't it? It's not, it's not, I mean, you obviously got your inspiration from watching and listening to your mum and so on, but it is a fiction, I believe. Yes,
it is. It's beginning to end. However, typical of somebody who writes a book, and I'm not atypical. You put a lot of yourself into these stories because it's what you know and what you see, and in a sense, as a writer, be it you a fiction writer or a non-fiction writer, you put a lot of yourself into these stories and the people you know, and I've put a lot of my family, myself, my family, and so on into these stories, into this story and the subsequent books.
So really, you're saying that when I asked you what sources do you use to develop characters and plot, the sources would be part of your own experience, but other sources?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the sources are the people I've known through my life, people I've worked with, people in my family. Obviously, there are characters in these books that if those people read these books, they would see themselves. But obviously, for dramatic purposes, what you do is that you amplify certain traits and so on, to add drama, to add conflict, but yeah, they're fictions.
What other sources did you use? Research-wise, did you have to do much research?
Oh, lots of research on the First World War, particularly the war in Palestine. Well, that's where a lot of the book is located. The way I've structured the novel is that you've got an old story and a new story. You've got the modern day story, and you've got the the story of the grandfather, pre-war, war, post-war, and that pre-war, war, post-war bit required a lot of reading about the campaign in Palestine and how it was waged, their successes and failures, and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, a lot of research. Yeah.
And you were talking a little bit there about developing the plot. Well, I mean, and about, you know, the drama and so on. What methods do you use to develop a plot?
Well, the way I started the whole journey of writing this book was to plan out the story from beginning to end. And in the process, I understood where the start, the middle, and the finish were going to be. But curiously, as I wrote, the characters started to take twists and turns and directions that didn't have a lot of control by me over where their story went, because they demanded of me that the story be pushed in certain directions. So I knew pretty well where the nodal points of the story would be, but believe me, and I've heard this from other writers as well, that the characters took over the narrative, and it was a wonderful thing because I got to know them extremely well, and I guess they got to know me very well as well. Yeah.
Maybe that's why you don't want to let them go, and you've got 2 more books to follow.
Yes, well, the subsequent books, the Severed Cord, which is the second book, and I'm currently writing the third book. Yes, that they demanded that I carry the story forward into new areas, new areas of their characters, new areas of their problems, and the fact that they were desperately trying to find solutions. Yeah.
And how do you? Well, I mean, I've read the book, but it seems so smooth. But how did you connect the past with the present in your writing?
Through the mechanism of really in the first book, the mechanism of the grandson meeting the grandfather when he was an old man, that carried the past into the present very, very starkly, because the old man was talking about opening up to his grandson. But there are other characters as well. There's the grandfather's daughter, the mother of the grandson, who largely is in denial, doesn't want to confront the past, doesn't want to it to intrude on her comfortable existence of denial. But to answer your question, how do you link the past? I think that's your question. That link the past with the present. The mechanism I've used is that I've interwoven the story so that there are sections of the story that actually live in the past, in that pre-war, war, post-war period, and then I interleave those with the journey that the grandson's having.
So that's interleaved chapters.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I find it very smooth though. It was good. Yeah. Yes. What are you really trying to say in this first novel, though? I mean, did you have, if you could sort of encapsulate it in like one paragraph, what are you trying to say?
If I were to encapsulate it, I would say that the past has a profound influence on us all. Not so much the past as we read it in history books, that we go to Gallipoli, well, that we might go to Gallipoli, that we might go to Anzac Day services. I don't mean that sort of past. I mean the past that is delivered through this mechanism of epigenetics, and it has a profound influence on us all, and it can create quite dysfunctional things in people, like depression, like anger, like violence, like all of these sorts of things.
Addiction, probably addiction.
And addictions as well, because not going into the science of epigenetics, because it's a pretty well researched mechanism. It doesn't change the DNA. It doesn't alter the DNA. The DNA stays intact. It's not like a mutation. What it is that profound trauma effectively switches on or switches off certain genes, and these things lead to a propensity to all of these sorts of dysfunctional things. What I'm really trying to say in all of this is that all of us really need to examine the past through our associations, our questioning, our conversations with past generations. And unfortunately, in all of this, is that we often learn too late. We often learn too late what that these things are happening, and certainly as children, we're not going to do it. And we're not going to sit with our grandparents and question them on their lives. And most of the time too, those past generations don't want to burden anybody with their tragedies and so on. So there is a bit of a difficulty there in exploring, the practical side of exploring what might be influencing us and our attitudes. But it is very, very important. And what I'm trying to say with this novel is that we need to re-establish some sort of sense of community. And that sense of community includes a close association with the past generations. In other words, in the past, grandparents, even great-grandparents to some degree, in some places, lived with the recent generation. These days, that's all breaking down. People get shuffled off into old people's homes, the retirement villages and so on. And what I'm saying is we really need to re-establish those direct links so that as children, we can have those profound connections with the past generations.
Well, sometimes you've just got to do it through technology, because you could be in the other side of the country or in a different country.
And that's another issue too.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we're also mobile
Yes.
these days, and communications are so, well, until COVID, have been so easy to get on an aircraft and fly. However, that is a separation, and yes, you're right, that it's a difficulty. Yeah.
So in your view, you've done so much research, you've written your book, you've done a lot of self-reflection. What do you think could be a solution to countering the impact of inherited trauma.
I think.
Have you really? I guess you've really said that.
Yeah, but let me answer that again, because I think there are specific things that we can do as a society, and I think we really need to establish that sense of community, of family, of community, and we really need to welcome past generations back into our homes.
Do you come to any conclusion in The Veiled Thread, which of course is your first book? I mean, you've written a second, and you're you're in the middle of writing a third. I mean, did you come to any conclusion in the first book, The Veiled Thread? I mean, I've got my own sort of thoughts about where you're going with your conclusions, but I might be off the track. So what have you?
Well, that's a good question, and I think probably the first book. No, I don't think it came to any concrete conclusion. I think the key character, Harry, the grandson, he's still on a journey. He's still looking for a concrete concept of what is influencing him in his life. In the second book, I come close. The characters come closer. In the second book, I've focused on an Aboriginal stockman who goes to Palestine with the grandfather of the first book, and I think it's designed, that second book, to open up the whole concept of epigenetics and inherited trauma to a wider group than just the grandfather and the grandson.
It's not mentioned though in the book. I mean, there's no reference to inherited. They don't talk about inherited trauma.
No, they don't. But it's pretty clear that this is. I believe it's pretty clear that this is what's happening. But So to answer your question, I think the first book, not so much of a conclusion. The second book, we come closer, very much closer to an understanding, the character's understanding. And in the third book, I think we get there.
But all three books stand alone, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They're all linked, and they have linked characters. But yes, you're absolutely right.
There's no repeats.
No, and they're standalone stories. They can be read in isolation. Yeah.
I love the way you put a teaser though. The first chapter of the second book at the end of your first book.
Yeah, well, that leads you into the concept that hang on a second, this inherited trauma phenomenon is out there affecting more than just a small group of people. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helped clear up for me a few of the questions I had.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.